Connecticut Farms, which is still there. You pass it all the time. You use that route to get to Route 22 or to the Garden State.
Church.
Yeah, it's on the right-hand side
Sure.
there. Connecticut Farms. That was you got to realize that almost all this area was a part of the town of Springfield in those days. Milburn was a part of Springfield. Connecticut Farms, Union was a part of Springfield. Half of Maplewood, more than half of Maplewood, Springfield. So this was all part of Springfield. Towns broke away later. So the church in Connecticut Farms, they didn't have a pastor at the time. So they said to him, we'll let you stay at our manse, at our church. So that's where he and his family were. Now, the Battle of Springfield occurred in two parts. And we're going to try to deal with the question of whether Washington was here, as tradition puts it. The first part was on the 7th of June, and the second part was on the 23rd. If you've read that plaque, you know that. They're both called the Battle of Springfield because, although it was in Connecticut Farms, that was Springfield in those days. The British should have won by any military calculations. They had 2 times the number of troops on the 7th, and they had 5 times the number of troops of the Americans on the 23rd. Why did they lose so many? Well, probably part of the reason is that they were very overconfident. They were so sure this was going to be an easy victory, kind of a get there and conquer them and that will all be over with. They wanted to break through to where the American troops were in Jockey Hollow up in Boston. So, at this spot, somewhere here, on Washington Rock, there was a part of a signal system. They had about 23 of these huge bonfires on the ridge of mountains that goes up from the plains, the shore plains, up to the Piedmont Ridge. And there was one here. It was 18 foot square at the bottom and 20 feet tall. And so when the not guard, but the lookout who was posted here saw the British coming in force, which they could in those days because all the trees weren't here. They'd been cut down to keep people's homes, probably. So he saw the British coming. He lit his fire. Now there was also one of those signal fires at the head of the notch up here at Hobart Gap. And so when that guy saw this fire lit, then he lit his, and then Washington up in Jockey Hollow knew to get the troops down here, the British are coming. So that's how that worked. So on that battle, the British, as I said, were very sure they were going to win easily. The American troops at Jockey Hollow had one awful winter. It was the worst winter on record to this day. 18 major snowstorms, the worst temperatures, the lowest temperatures for the whole winter ever recorded. They had been starving and hungry. There had been a mutiny, and that hadn't been kept totally secret. The British knew it through their spies. So there'd been a mutiny. They were sure these troops just weren't going to fight very hard, and it was going to be an easy victory. Come out here and beat the Germans. So they thought they were going to have an easy time with it, and I think that's why they quit so easily. You know, when you expect an easy victory and it doesn't happen easy, then your morale is hurt. If you'd expected an absolutely horrible battle, and it wasn't such a horrible battle, then your morale wouldn't be so hurt. And but the British got out here. The whole point is that the troops that fought on the 7th were not the American army. They were local militia. In other words, not troops that had starved. They'd been living in their homes all winter. It may have been a horrible winter, but they had their homes. They weren't living in cabins out in Jockey Hollow, and they weren't a part of a mutiny or anything else. So the militia fought horrendously hard. The British had made no friends by this, burn and leave tactic that they illustrated when they had burnt the pastor's home at Elizabeth, because it wasn't just his home that was burnt. They'd been a lot of places there. So the British had made no friends with that. These people were fighting for their homes, their family, their farms, and they fought very hard. The second thing is, the British used the old tactic, which was you stood up like a man and you faced the enemy and you shot at him. You know, you didn't go hiding behind trees and boulders and houses and shoot at the enemy. You stood in a line and one group went down like this and the other group was above them and they fired. And they were absolutely mad at the Americans. The Americans were just terrible. Used these awful tactics of hiding and shooting at you. And so they weren't exactly overwhelmingly beaten, but they were stopped at Connecticut Farms. They didn't even get up here to Milburn. And so they retreated on the 7th. Now, their commander was down in Virginia somewhere, and they wanted to wait for him to come back. So they waited. That's why it was so much longer before they got out here again. Now, where was Washington during all this? Oh, something else, Pastor Caldwell. It was during that first battle that Pastor Caldwell's wife was shot by a British soldier. She was in that manse, the church building down there that they had loaned to them to use. And they, because of these tactics, sneaky tactics that the Americans used, rather than just standing in a line and shooting, the British were very skittish about things. And they saw a curtain in the manse move, and it was one of the kids. One of the kids had run to the window to look out, and he moved the curtains, and the soldier, the British soldier, was in the vicinity. He thought, this is a sniper about to shoot at me, and he shot at the window and killed the wife. Actually, Pastor Caldwell never blamed the British for that. I mean, he was mad at them for their burning his house down and a few other things. And he was mad for them just being around. But he realized it was an accident on that soldier. But the other people in this area, they took a hold of that. That became a slogan, like remember the Maine, remember whatever her first name, I think it was Rachel Caldwell. Remember her? She had young children. She was breastfeeding a baby still at that point. And that's what she had been doing in that room. Sometimes you hear tell the British soldier shot her while she was breastfeeding the baby, but that isn't true. So, in any case, then they burnt down Connecticut Farms. They burnt down Elizabeth. Well, now Pastor Caldwell doesn't even have a house over there anymore. He's lost 2 homes to the British. Pastor Caldwell, by the way, had an official position in the American forces. He was quartermaster. Quartermaster means he was the guy who provided all the supplies. That was his responsibility for the, not for the regular army up in Jockey Hollow, but for the militia. So Pastor Caldwell had that job. Pastor Caldwell was not home when his wife was shot. He was up in this area with a lot of the militia and helping with the supply. Okay, so the British come back on the 23rd. Okay, I forgot. Washington, was he here? Washington was definitely in the area during the battle on the 7th. He had his troops stationed up at Hobart Gap, which was the passageway through the mountains here that the British were trying to get. If you know where Hobart Gap Road is and Route 24, that's about where the troops were. They were standing there as backup troops to the militia if needed. They never fought in that battle. They weren't needed. The militia turned the British back on the 7th. Whether Washington came over here or not depends on whether you believe he might leave his troops up there at Hobart Gap and run over here on his horse and take a look from here or not. Most historians doubt he would do that as commanding officer, but there's always the possibility that he did do that at some point during the battle. Certainly tradition, quote unquote, tradition does place him there. But it's doubtful that he was here. In the battle on the 23rd, he definitely, absolutely was not here. He was marching with most of his army from Jockey Hollow over to the Hudson River by way of Boonton and Parsippany. And we know that because he wrote many reports to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. And the reports on the 20th and the 21st and so forth are from Boonton and Parsippany and going along that way. But Boonton is second, Parsippany first, and Boonton. He wanted to prevent the British from going up the Hudson River and conquering the West Point and breaking the northern colonies and the New England colonies away from the rest of the colonies. And he thought that was the more important thing to do. So he was in Boonton at the time of battle. There were some regular army troops, as that says, that it took part, but again, it was mostly the militia that did the fighting. The British did get up into the heart of Milburn down here, but Washington definitely was not here during that battle. And again, they were turned back after a lot more fighting than the first time. And there are those, mostly people who live in New Jersey, as you might guess, who consider that the turning part of the war rather than the Battle of Saratoga. And there's some good reason to argue that because it saved the American army at Jockey Hollow. The British never tried to come into New Jersey again after that battle. They stayed in New York City, and the army was saved to go on and win the war at Norfolk. So it was an important battle, there's no doubt about it.
Okay, question?
Now, yeah.
The plaque that you see right by the Milburn Mall, is that the plaque for the battle on the 23rd? And
I would think it would have to be. I haven't read it.
And where did the battle on the 7th take place? If you said
Down
it,
in Connecticut Farms.
Oh, okay.
Never got up this far.
So I bet you I'll read the plaque again. It probably that says this is where the British pulled back. That must be the 23rd.
Stop there and look at that. Oh, get back to Pastor Caldwell and then any questions. Because I don't want to forget about Pastor Caldwell. So Pastor Caldwell, he was responsible for supplies, and they ran out of wadding of all things, which you need to shove down the rifle, kind of pack paper, before you put your powder in, and then before you put your bullet in, and it didn't all come in the one neat package, everything together like it does today. So they ran out of the wadding. And so his solution was to go into the church at Springfield, which wasn't his church. His church was in Elizabeth. So that's not exactly accurate when it says his church, except in the general sense that he was a Presbyterian, and these were all Presbyterian churches. But he went into Springfield Church down here and got out the hymnals, and the famous quote is given Watts, boys. Watts, W-A-T-T-S, is a hymn writer, most famous probably to this day for our God, our God in ages past, our hope for years to come. If you know that hymn. Our God, I forget what the word is. Our God, our ages past, our hope for years to come. Da 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 da, and our eternal home. There. So, give him Watt's voice wasn't give him what for, it was give him the hymn writer from the hymn. Just one little post note, in 1781, before the final treaty, which was 83 with the British, so technically we were still at war. Well, we were, because the Battle of Norfolk had happened. Pastor Caldwell had gone to New York City. The British had abandoned by then. and had bought something, and he came back. Believe it or not, you could run a boat up into the middle of Union in those days. Right there where you get on the Garden State Parkway. There's a low area, it's swampy now, but you used to be able to even bring masted ships up there, and you could see them from up here apparently. And he had come back to what were called the Elizabethtown docks with his package, and a sentry, American soldier this time, who was posted there, thought he looked suspicious, a kind of a terrorist, you know, and he shot him and killed him. And so now there were 9 kids without a father or a mother. A British soldier had killed the mother, and an American soldier had killed the father, and the town of Springfield had 9 kids on their hand, and they had to find families for them. What I'd like to look into a little bit more someday when I have time is that one of the children was adopted by the Count of Lafayette and went to France to live as a noble. Not for the rest of his life. He would return in adulthood here, and he was the founder of the magazine that still is published to this day called Christian Century. He never became a pastor like his father, but he founded that magazine when he returned. And so it was kind of a sad ending for the Caldwell family. Of course, the town of Caldwell, where I now live, is named after him as well. Jess, what's your question?
I'm really interested to hear that it was the militia that brought back the British here, and I guess I'd like to hear more about the makeup of the militia and what the numbers were. And
you know, all that stuff I'm not positive. You know, yeah, as part of the militia, you had to own your own rifle, and you kept it in your home, and you got called up by a signal. In this case,
these were
the bonfire.
civilian soldiers.
What?
These were civilian
They were
soldiers,
civilian
right?
soldiers.
So,
They
I
were
mean, one
farmers,
wonders how they
Farmers,
strategized,
storekeepers, etc.
how they strategized a victory like that.
Yeah, of course, they mentioned Nathaniel Greene was in part on the second battle, right? The strategist. But you're right.
Okay, and the other question I have is, when was the last battle fought? What was the year that the last battle was fought? Do you know?
I don't know that, but it's the Battle of Norfolk, where the French Navy came, and then Lafayette was with the American troops on land. So the Navy was blocking off the British from getting in from sea, and they pushed the British up against the water there at Norfolk on Chesapeake Bay.
Was that Patriot movie? Was that based on that?
But that's the last one. And then the treaty was signed in 1783, the Treaty of Paris. That ended the war. And that's when we started our independent government, the Articles of Confederation. But I need to look up when that battle was. Somebody's got it. She's looking at
Is that the one with Russell Crowe?
Battle of Yorktown.
I'd actually been talking
What's his name?
Put in Battle of Yorktown. See what the
Russell
date
Crowe?
is.
No?
I'm sure they'll
Hugh
tell
Jackman? Russell Crowe?
No, not Russell.
you. The archives for the park system
Hugh Jackman?
are at the park
Hugh Jackman?
headquarters on Clifton Street in Newark. And Kathy Cowell, who's now the park archivist, just started like 3 years ago. And she had an intern from Rutgers University by the name of Phil Napoli. They put in 4 of these, I think it is, not 5. Originally they wanted to do 5, but there were a lot of difficulties with the history of Diamond Mill Pond, uncertainties, so they dropped that. But there's 4 of them now around the park, and they did a marvelous job. What?
I just saw one again. My niece and I, my cousin and I hiked last weekend.
Mel Gibson.
Right,
I think so.
what's the name of the movie? Right where the
Mel
Lenape turns
Gibson.
over
The
to.
Patriot.
Oh, the Patriot,
As
yeah.
you head toward the wild rhododendrons, as you head towards Hemlock Falls, but you continue
There's
down.
one there.
And it's all about
One
the
over it.
homestead land that you own.
There's one up at Turtleback Rock, down the CCC camp there. And there's one at Painter's Point, is it, Dennis? Where's the 4th? Painter's Point?
Hemlock.
Hemlock Falls, here, Turtleback.
And I think Painter Point has the one on the river.
Any other questions?
Yeah, do you know how far south the British got during the Revolutionary War?
You know, I'll confess that I'm not very knowledgeable about the Revolutionary War in general. But I believe there were battles in Georgia as far as South Dakota. I'm pretty sure.
In New Jersey,
My
there's stuff
field,
down. In
my
New
field
Jersey,
of
there's
history,
stuff down by the
amazingly enough, was
Delaware Memorial
Europe.
Bridge.
Anybody find out what year the Battle of Yorktown was? Doesn't show up on Google?
What is it? Battle of Yorktown?
Battle of Yorktown.
Up there, what is this thing? And there's
I brushed them off.
Yeah, the 6 are bad this year.
How did you find them?
So we're going to
Ending
go
in-
back by a woods road that parallels the paved road. The woods road was actually there before the paved road. When this all became park, the landscape firm that was hired at that time, which was not the Olmsted, proposed that they have a road closer to where the mountain dropped off and they refused. And then the Olmsteds built it, so then the paved road was built. And it's confusing that they're both called Crest Drive. So that the one's the Crest Trail and the other is Crest Drive.
1781. 1781.
What?
1781.
1781 was the Battle of Yorktown. Right.
It doesn't smell bad.